Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen,
I'm Debbie.
and today we're going to be talking about mental health. This is such a big topic, and there's a lot that you could talk about under the umbrella of mental health and mental health care. But I think we're just going to talk about our experiences around mental health, what we navigate and deal with, and all the mental illnesses that I have. No, I'm kidding.
All the letters behind your name.
Yeah, all the letters. Yeah, or just how we, I don't know, learned about what mental health is. I think it's not something that I grew up necessarily hearing so much in the general conversations that adults have. It wasn't until I became a young adult myself that I started to learn more about mental health and the idea of self care. I don't know about you, Mom. I don't know what that was like for you. I don't think it was probably something that was talked about either as when you were growing up or as a young adult necessarily. Therapy was very stigmatized. It still is, and we're still in the process of destigmatizing a lot of different mental health care practices, which could be so many different things for different people. But I think for me, it's only been in the last, I don't know, 5 years maybe, where, well, probably longer than that, but where I've really had consistent therapy and access to, I mean, I've tried hypnosis for different things. I've tried acupuncture that could be connected to self care, which could help your mental wellness and well being. I mean, there's so many different modalities. Anyway, you're giving me a funny face.
I'm listening.
So, what are you thinking about over there?
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I wasn't giving a neutral face. No, I was thinking that you said acupuncture. No, I think acupuncture helps mental health. I think when you said hypnosis, I'm scared of hypnosis.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I think it comes under the guise for me of not being in control of my consciousness,
Oh,
even though
okay.
I know that you're not really asleep and that
Yeah,
you're
well,
aware.
yeah, what's in the movies is not true or accurate, I don't think,
Right,
or in the one
right.
of the episodes of Monk that I just recently watched where he gets hypnotized back to his 7-year-old self.
Right.
I don't know that that's I mean, I've never heard case studies around that. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but in my experience of being hypnotized, it's you're still very conscious. I think it's more of like the mental state that you're in, which is a relaxed one that helps you work through things. Or like I've had experience with EMDR, which is a type of therapy that helps rewire your, what is it called? Your brain pathways, neural pathways,
Through eye movement?
through eye movement. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did that in my early 20s. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things out there that, yeah, have been scientifically backed. I think acupuncture has been scientifically backed. Of course, it's an Eastern practice, but I think, yeah, Eastern practices have a lot of experience. I mean, they've been around for a long, 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 long time, longer than Western medicine, of course. But I think the practice of having both is what's really beneficial for a lot of people nowadays. But yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with learning about therapy. And I mean, I think therapy was thought to be woo woo for a very long time. I think it still is, especially just talk therapy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only therapy I've ever gone to is talk therapy. I haven't done any of the other things. I haven't been hooked up. I haven't been, I'm
Hooked up.
kidding. Hooked up to a machine. Oh my
What
goodness.
kind of mental health care are you hooked up to a
Well, they
machine?
do things with probes, and they also do things with they shock you with electric shock if you, God
Mom,
forbid,
that's so old
that.
school though. That's not, I don't think that's really,
No, they're doing it, only they're doing it more differently and more gently.
is that right?
Yeah, so they're still bringing back
Scary to
practices, but they're
think.
doing it in a more 21st century way than they did
Okay.
before. So there's all kinds of pulse
Like
therapy
from the
and,
days of the insane asylums? I mean, those were
well, from the day of
not
frontal
good.
lobotomies, yes.
Well, yeah.
They're not
God,
doing,
horrible.
yeah, but they are doing things because they know a lot more about the brain. They have PET scans. They know how to delineate certain centers of your brain, and so they are doing that. And thank goodness they are, because they're helping people with Parkinson's through things like that and all
Sure.
kinds of stuff. So, but my only experience with therapy would be talk therapy.
I see.
Really,
Okay.
I haven't gotten stuck with pins, and I haven't, done the hot rocks. I mean, all that I haven't done.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
right.
you have much to look forward to, Mom. I mean, now is your
Oh,
curiosity piqued?
I'm going to have to try all these things now.
Yeah, you've got the time. Go try
Really,
them out.
that'll be my new hobby, a retired person's hobby, checking out all
Yeah,
the different,
gallivanting across the different mental health care and self-care practices.
right, all the different therapeutic practices. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
That's me,
Therapeutic,
all
that's
right.
the word I've been looking for.
Yeah, that's me.
It's funny because I think I'm just such a curious person and I'm very interested in trying all the things, especially
Right.
when it comes to self-care or mental or therapeutic care, mental health care. Something that I'm interested in is, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's recently drawing attention again. Is, microdosing psilocybin. Have you been aware of that?
No.
Okay, well, I would only do it under, you can go, I think there's a place in, or some places in Portland, Oregon, and a lot of the work is being done, I think in a Nordic country that I can't remember right now which one it is, but there's facilities where you have people with you throughout the process and they give you the doses of the psilocybin and it's a therapy practice basically as they walk you through your, I guess it's called a trip. I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about
So
with drugs, but
is this like LSD?
I know psilocybin is mushroom,
Okay,
and
because they are
LSD I think is different.
doing
That's
work with LSD with people that have PTSD, especially those that have been in warfare,
yeah,
have been in battle. Yeah.
yeah, because I think drugs in general have such a stigma too, except for the ones that are pushed on us by the pharmaceutical companies. But those are pretty normalized to us. But these kind of other drugs that could potentially help people overcome, or not, maybe overcome's not the right word, but navigate depression, anxiety, PTSD, things like that, could have really lasting effects. And they've done trials on this that it has helped a number of people. So I'm super curious about that too and trying that. Because I'm a little too nervous and anxious person to do it on my own.
Well, I don't care how many people in the room with me. I don't think I would do that. See, I
No?
have a no. I think for me, my line gets drawn at medicinals.
What kind of medicinals are you
Any
talking
kind
about?
of medicinals. I mean, I grew
But
up
like
in an
orange juice could be like a medicinal, couldn't
well,
it
I know, but
be?
but you know what I'm saying. Anything sort of in
Yeah.
pill form, or that is a hallucinogen, or that gives you an altered state of consciousness. Any of those
Hmm.
things,
Not for you.
alcohol. I mean, I drink alcohol, but
Hmm.
I've only had a very few times where I've gotten overly intoxicated in my early college years, and I don't want to ever do that again. Know how much I can drink, which is very little because
Hmm.
I don't drink often,
Yeah.
and that's where I end it for myself.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a household. I don't remember ever talking about it. Well, I don't know where I'm going to say fear for the lack of a better word right now, but where that came from or concern, maybe it's major concern over not doing any of those things and putting things into your body that you, unless you actually absolutely have to. And I'm
Yeah.
not exactly sure where that came from. I know it's my mother probably more than my father,
Hmm.
but neither one of them, other than the fact, of course, they smoked when we
Right.
were young, and they
Let's not
both
forget.
quit smoking later on in their lives, but not too much later, but late enough for that to develop problems for both of them. But I was given the definite message
Hmm.
that you have to be careful. And even if you're taking aspirin or Tylenol or any of that stuff, you have to know exactly what you're taking and you only take it when you absolutely need to and check the labels and all that from a very early age, not to where it made me anxious about it, but it made me I was very serious about it. So when I had friends early on in my life, 13, 14, 15, that were starting to experiment with certain drugs and smoking weed and all that, I was very alienated from that process because I never wanted to be out of control of my own body.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I stayed away for a while, and then I had an experience with marijuana that I don't want to replicate again. And so I never did that again.
Hmm.
And so I've been very sort of medicine free my pretty much my entire life unless I absolutely needed something. And
Yeah.
so sure I take Tylenol if I need to, and yes, I have certain meds I have to take now that I'm getting older, but very limited meds. I take a
Hmm.
statin for
Hmm.
cholesterol. But and I remember going to the doctor years ago, and you mentioned this on another episode when she said to me, Deb, meds are meds are okay. You can take meds because they help you.
Hmm.
But I'm talking about meds that are meant to alter your state of awareness.
Yeah,
And
I think
that,
those are a different
yeah,
category than
right.
like
And that's not what I
antidepressives.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what I want to do. I don't
Sure.
want, I mean, if I
Even in
needed
a
an anti,
controlled environment with people that will take care of you.
no, because I don't,
Yeah.
yes, I don't know what my body would do. I can't, I've trusted
Hmm.
my body in its state of awareness in the normal environment. I don't know what it would do.
Hmm.
Certainly when I broke my ankle, the nurse said to me, we're going to inject you so that we can reset your ankle and you won't be screaming like on the old westerns. And I'm like, okay. And she
Yeah.
said to me, as soon as you're going to feel really warm throughout your whole body
Yeah.
when we inject this into you. And sure enough, I felt really warm. It just came over me, but I was anticipating what she was telling me. And
Hmm.
then they set my ankle and I didn't feel that. Good.
Yeah.
But
Good.
it didn't change. I knew who I was. The room wasn't spinning. I didn't,
Right. Yeah.
that kind of thing.
I totally understand that. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I'm very hesitant to take drugs, and even for a long spell, I didn't even want to touch ibuprofen or Tylenol. But then I got to a certain point in my life where I was like, I'm in pain, and I'm just not tending to it because I don't want to
Right.
take this drug. So maybe I should just
Right.
take it a little bit more liberally and not be so rigid on
Right.
that. I even just, my doctor was like, because I was dealing with IBS stuff, and she was like, well, why don't you just go? I can recommend an SSNI or something like that. That was not an SSRI because I had already been on Lexapro, and that made me feel really dizzy the first couple of weeks. And then I was on it for about a year, but then I got laid off, and then your whole healthcare plan changes, and so you can't get the same drugs again. So it always makes me anxious to start a drug that I may not be able to continue taking because of not having access to healthcare.
Right.
And so recently, I she recommended me go on a different type of antidepressive, anti-anxiety, and I haven't gone on it, but I did get it from the pharmacy because I was like, maybe I should just like have it in case I decide to go on it
Right.
if this exercise isn't helping me with my IBS. But then I was thinking maybe I should just go on it anyway because I do have anxiety in the mornings, like before I wake up, like a little bit of sleep anxiety. So I was thinking maybe that would be good for that. But it's still hard for me to choose to go on something like that because I think someone like me who's probably, my therapist has told me to reframe it. What did she say? She said somebody who has anxiety instead of an anxious person. She told me to
Yeah.
reframe it for
Right.
myself.
Because you're
Because I
not
always,
always anxious.
yeah, yeah, someone who navigates with anxiety or someone
Right.
who, yeah. So sometimes I think, well, am I just really, I don't know, quote unquote, high functioning so that I don't think I need it as maybe as badly as I do this medicine? I don't know. That's something that I navigate too, where it's like, would this really help me? And I don't know it. But I took such a low dose of the last SSRI that I was on that I was like, I don't even know if this is helping. It was 2.5 milligrams because they wanted me to go up to 10 milligrams and it was way too much for me. So yeah, I'm sensitive to drugs basically.
Well,
So
there's
it
a
makes me
placebo
hesitate.
effect. Right. There's a placebo effect also for some of that. If you're taking a low
Right.
dose of something, it just could be something that just takes the edge off or just makes you believe that this
Hmm.
is what's helping you,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, it
Right.
could be,
Yeah.
definitely. Whereas it could also really be helping, but maybe a higher dose for me next time, and I could just deal with that.
Right.
But the anxiety really does affect my willingness to be on certain medications. So it's tricky. It's tricky
It
for
is
me to
tricky.
navigate. Yeah.
They gave me, I forget the name of it now, some pain medication after I had my surgery for my ankle. So they gave me what was essentially an opioid
Hmm.
when I had the surgery, and
Hmm.
I did not want to take it. I did not want to take it. I did not want to take it, and I wound up maxing out on the Tylenol dose that I could take for the day and white knuckling it until I could take the next dose of Tylenol throughout the whole night. It was like my ankle was in a basically an animal trap. I never had pain like that before. And I just couldn't give in to taking that because I was afraid of what that might mean, that I might get addicted to it, right? And I
Oh,
know
wow.
people who've taken only one or two doses of an opioid and want more. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I just don't want to do this. So I maxed out on, I think, 3,400 milligrams of Tylenol I could take. And then I just had to white knuckle it throughout the night until I could take it the following morning.
Wow,
And
Mom.
and I do have a pretty high tolerance to discomfort. I'm
Hmm.
not sure it's as high as it was when I was younger. As I get older, I know
Hmm.
certain things bother me that didn't before. Yeah. So I did not take it. And looking back on it, maybe I should have,
Yeah.
right? There's been a
Yeah.
number of situations in my life where I have done what normal people do. I will not do.
Right. Like I have so many friends who just take like sleeping pills or like just have a slew of medications that they go on and off of all the time based on I mean this is like very specific, specific stuff, and I know that a lot of people are
Right.
trying to figure out the right amount and dosages of drugs, all and medications and all of that. So that changes things, of course, and it's really hard to find the right medications, especially if you're on different ones that are trying to all formulate in your brain to make it the right space for you to inhabit.
Well, like
Um,
your father said, because he his degree was in biology and he took a lot of biochemistry, and he said, well, you've got the brain barrier. It
yeah.
just doesn't want to accept the drugs because it's trying to protect itself.
Hmm.
So you have to come up with a certain cocktail that your brain is going to allow in,
Right.
basically, to help you.
Yeah.
So,
That's too bad that
yeah,
he said that about himself, and they weren't able to find the right cocktail for him.
yes,
That's
yeah, yeah,
ironic.
yeah. And the drugs are better. I'm going to use the. I'm sorry, I'm using the word drugs, but the medication is better now than it was back then as well.
Well, I also
Yeah,
think it's interesting that you were saying about changing as we age or things like that. And I think the same could be true for all different mental health stuff. Basically, what I'm saying is mental health can change throughout your life. And I think that's something I'm realizing too in my own life where you might not have access to certain things or the awareness about yourself until you start doing research or learning about these things. And I think that's why people are probably more apt to self diagnose or because they're learning about themselves because of this collective engagement around things like ADHD or neurodivergence and autism and all of these things that I think as a society collectively we've always pushed to the margins a lot of these things like oh that's like not normal or that's like those people over there when really I think as a society we probably this is way more common, and I think that's the same thing to be said about the queer community. It's like everyone's like coming out now and everyone's transgender and it's like that's not true. It's just that there's more of an acceptance around these things and we're trying to collectively, those of us that are interested in it, destigmatize these things. And that's why you see more people talking about it. It's not that there's more of us that are dealing with that or more of us are queer now. It's just that society has allowed space for that to be more normalized, more accepted, more and having more diverse people talk about these things. Whereas I think when you were growing up, Mom, maybe that wasn't the case. Like, did your mom or people in your circle talk about going to therapy or what any of that was, like going on medication or anything like that? Or neurodivergence? I mean, that probably wasn't a word that was really thrown around a lot when you were my
no,
age.
no. I think neurodivergence if it was, it may have been with professionals. I want to comment on what you said earlier about there's not, it appears that there's all these people coming out and all that. Well, all those people that are coming out, the reason why I call it coming out is because they were all in. I mean, they were all underground,
Mm-hmm.
or, in the proverbial closet. And
Yeah.
so they lived a dual lifestyle because they couldn't live the lifestyle they really wanted to live because it didn't conform.
Mm-hmm.
So the good thing about, I'm hoping, the sophistication of our society over time and the acceptance of diversity over time will allow more people to be more authentic. And
Yes.
that's for me, that we've talked about the how important that is to me as an individual, and how hopefully you become more and more authentic, which leads to a feeling of well-being, which lowers mental health issues. It lowers mental health issues if you can be your
Yes.
authentic self, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because you're more satisfied. The word happy is kind of a weird word, but you're just a
Mm-hmm.
more perhaps satisfied individual.
Mm-hmm. Content or maybe
Right,
fulfilled or something like
right,
that.
right.
Yeah.
In terms of therapy, or mental health issues, the interesting thing is that my parents surrounded themselves with people. They had friends who were kind of with it people,
Mm-hmm.
and they were more, they were free thinkers, they were academics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do remember hearing people that were going to therapy, or they were talking about mental health things around me.
Mm-hmm.
And my own parents went to couples counseling when I was growing up. And I don't really know how many other my friends' families, parents were doing that. And so there wasn't, in my immediate family, there wasn't a stigma about that. I don't know how it was as the family, as you went out of the circles,
Mm-hmm.
like with my grandparents and that kind of thing. But I think my mother, of course, talked to my grandparents about these things because I think she wanted them to be more aware.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think that's what every generation does. The younger generation tries to push the older generation into new waves of thought. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was lucky in that that was not stigmatized,
Mm-hmm.
and that my mother was really a good support person for me when I was having issues of, whatever it was, whether I was had anxiety about something or I was nervous. In fact, there was this morning I was talking to my husband about how she used to say to me on the first day of school, because I was a very anxious person the first day of school. I
Mm.
couldn't sleep the night before. I was just totally a mixture of excitement and concern and all that and
Oh yeah.
fear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to I really wanted to be more like my brother, who just slept through everything that it seemed like at night. And I'm like, God, he's sleeping. He's going to have school tomorrow, and he's not even worried about it. And I was like so worried about it. But we were 7 years apart too, so it was different.
Mm-hmm.
But she would say, you're going to walk into your classroom, head up, right foot forward. And I remember saying that to myself. Go into your classroom, head up, right foot forward. Okay. So she had little things that she would offer me, and as all mothers do, I think, that helped me to feel calm.
Yes. I remember when I was in middle school and that day you dropped me off and we were going to the Holocaust Museum and I didn't want to go. I was very anxious about it and you said, "Just remember you have dance class later tonight."
Yeah, something to look forward to.
Yes. So
Yes.
you always reframed it for me a little bit, which was helpful, and you still made me do things that were uncomfortable, which I hated at the time, but I'm grateful for now.
There
But
you go.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're
Yeah.
yeah, mothers or parents do help with that, and I think you've always been a cushion for me, especially during everything in my life, but definitely around breakups or major transitions. I've always been able to call you crying or just upset or always need advice around financial stuff, whatever. Like, you've always been that person for me. And you always have really great advice that's pretty grounded, which I've always appreciated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being able to do that for you, and it, it's it's my pleasure to be there. And I feel my dad used to say when he was older that he wanted his mommy, and there are times where I feel the same way now as an older person. I was telling my husband that I'm retired now, and there's none of the older generation I can hang out with.
Yeah.
Nobody's here,
Yeah.
and it's hard
Hmm.
to not. There are few. I have cousins that are a little bit older than me, and you know, but and that's wonderful. But in terms of my grandparents, my parents, my great aunt and uncles, they're not here anymore. And
Hmm.
you know what the rub about this is that once you get to an age where you're not distracted by
Right.
work and kids and all that, and yet you can actually sit down and have coffee, they're not here to have coffee with. And
Yes.
so I think that I have felt that as I've gotten older, that the missing of my family is sort of a mental health issue for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Mom. Well, I'm sure you have more to say on that, but I think this is what my sleep anxiety is about because I think, well, it started back in 2019 when I first lost my job, but then it morphed over the years. And I think it's been about like lost or losing time. Because I'll
Mm,
just wake up in that twilight sleep, like 4 or 5 in the morning, and just be like, oh my God, people aren't here. I need to go see people. Oh, what if this, oh, I'm all this time that has been I don't know. It's just like
right.
it's almost hard to articulate because it's just like these very fast-paced thoughts, but also a lot of it is just in your body, kind of like this anxiety, like this pulse of anxiousness. And I always try to tell myself to calm down, but yeah, I think you're right. It's a mental health issue around not being able to, like, lost community.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I never really, I mean, I had anxiety when I was a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
I had my mother to help me through all that, which was really fantastic. And
Mm-hmm.
I suffered from panic attacks when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to learn different ways to settle that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that largely came from the fact that my parents' marriage was breaking up,
Yeah.
and I was absorbing all of that. So at 17, I started to go to talk therapy. And I did that for maybe for about a year. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to say I don't really remember, but I think it was about a year because then we moved out of the area and I came to where I am now. And then I think I was able to manage that. And so I didn't feel like I needed it. And so I usually would use the exercises or whatever the person said to me or the feeling I had around that to help to sort of calm that anxiety that would arise. And I had tricks for that, and I would do all those things. And my mother, who also suffered from anxiety, who also went to therapy on her own as well, would tell me the things her therapist would tell her that would calm her nerves down and in
Mm-hmm.
certain situations. And so I would use those exercises as well, and they did great.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not opposed to that because throughout my life there's been periods of no therapy and then ramped up periods of therapy and then no therapy. And
Same.
I think that is something that is more usual now. I think people do that. I think people are way more open about saying they're in therapy. There's all kinds of advertisements now with athletes talking about going to therapy and
Mm-hmm.
celebrities and all that. So
Yes.
that's really good.
Mm.
I think therapy should be under the guise of insurance under preventive care, and it
Yes.
shouldn't be just, 10 sessions or 20 sessions or whatever.
Right.
They
Yeah.
need to realize that this is not a 20 session, we're out the door and everybody's cured kind of thing.
Right.
But
It's a
therapy also
lifetime.
should not necessarily be a continual lifetime thing. You would hope at
Hmm.
some point you would be able to use the things you've learned, kind of like in school, to help you get through those life issues that come up.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that during certain life events, going to
Hmm.
therapy or being in groups with people who are having the same experiences is really important. So
Right.
I don't ever remember growing up thinking that that was a bad thing. I think I thought that everybody did that because my parents
Yeah.
talked about it all the time.
That's
So
great.
I didn't realize it wasn't a thing, but I also began to realize that wasn't something I should talk about either.
Ah,
Because none
so
of my
it's
friends were
double.
talking about it.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about it. So with my own level of anxiety, I suffered in silence with friends
Hmm.
because I
Yeah.
didn't want to out myself and say that I was having these
Oh,
issues.
I relate to that. Yeah.
But I like to reframe the idea of being an anxious, like you were saying, an anxious person or having anxiety with it being something that is something to be looked down upon. Actually, I think that if you're an intuitive person and an empathetic person, your likelihood of being a person prone to anxiety is probably right there because you're feeling so much of not only yourself but other people around you that
Yeah.
why wouldn't you have this anxiety,
Yes.
right? So you kind of have
Yeah.
to learn to put boundaries around how much you can absorb as an empath,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
really just focus
Hmm.
on your own well-being, and then you can focus on the well-being of others or the not well-being of others. You don't want to
Exactly.
absorb all that, which I think that people who are sensitive
Hmm.
have a tendency, not to say that there are people who are empaths that may not have anxiety, good, but I think that overall people who are thinking a lot about their feelings
Hmm.
have anxiety around that
Yeah.
because they're more apt to analyze
Yes.
their situations
Yes.
instead of
Which my
just move
therapist says I
through
do.
life without.
I wonder about this too, because you said maybe therapy shouldn't be lifelong, but I also think it's like nice to have someone that's outside of your community, your friends, your partner, whoever, just to have someone to talk to. And they don't know you personally in like a social way, so they have just it's just kind of you and your time to just talk about whatever you want, and your therapist is going to be on your side or just listen, which I
Yeah.
think is so nice. I was thinking about your childhood too, and then it made me think about my childhood because I often wonder, like, losing my dad, I probably just generationally would have had anxiety just because of the Jewishness and that kind of lineage. But I also wonder how much of my mental illnesses were started from losing my father at a young age because I took me a long time because I also, like you, suffered in silence because I didn't know that this was what it was until I started doing research in my teens. But I started around 10 years old to pick my skin because I was anxious, and later found out that that's called dermatillomania, which is a body focused repetitive behavior that a lot of people who it affects women more often than men, and it is usually combined with obsessive compulsive disorder, which I also have, and anxiety, of course, because that's all kind of in the same realm of mental illness. And so I didn't know what that was for many, many, many years, and I didn't know how to treat it for a long time because there's not a lot of research being done on dermatillomania, and there's not a lot of help until about, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago when I found a nonprofit based out of Chicago, I think, who made pamphlets around different ways you can navigate dermatillomania. And for me, it's getting dip nails. So it makes my nails blunt enough that I don't pick my skin. And it's the only time in my life where I've never had scabs. And that I was 32, 33. So I think so much of that I often wonder, would I have had this if my dad didn't die? What causes these this impetus for me to pick my skin? And also it's just like, so it's a catch 22 for me because it's such a bad cycle, right? You anxious, you pick your skin, then you feel really bad about yourself, you feel ashamed, and then you don't want to show your skin, so then you're trying to find ways to cover your skin, and then it causes you to have low self-esteem, and it's just this like really bad cycle that you get into. It's really hard to get out of, and medication maybe could help me with that, but also they're saying like it's not talk therapy, it's another type of therapy, cognitive behavioral, I think it's called
Well,
CBT,
mhm.
but that's often not covered by insurance. There's so many inaccessible things when it comes to mental health care, that being one of them. So yeah, I'm talking about it now, and it's like the first time, and the last couple of years I've been more open about this, but it's just something that I never talked about because I was so ashamed about it for so many years. And it wasn't until recently where I felt like I can really talk about it and be more open about my process and what it's been like for me. So yeah, I think if I had had more access to, I don't know. I mean, it's funny now to think about like computers as not being really accessible back when I was growing up because it's not that long ago. But yeah, I mean, I was doing research on our desktop computer, in 2007. And there wasn't much information out there. So
Right.
Yeah, it's funny to think about. Okay, there's a large portion of the population who suffer from this mental illness, and then in combined with being OCD. And of course, I've never been diagnosed with OCD, only generalized anxiety. But when you have OCD, you know it. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think they called it I don't remember it being called OCD when I was a kid, but I went
Hmm.
through what my mom would call ritualistic behavior, which is part of
Yes.
OCD.
Yes, and I
Yes,
think it's to
right.
control your environment, right? Which I
It
think for
is.
me, that comes from having a traumatic experience. Now, maybe I would have had OCD regardless of that traumatic experience because it's
Right.
common to have obsessive compulsive
Yeah.
disorder, things like that. But I think it just compounded on me for sure, where it's like you said earlier, things come and go. And I think with OCD and dermatillomania, it's always been like an up and down ride for me where
Right.
it's maybe
Right.
lessened and then it maybe gets worse and then maybe it's in the middle. I mean, it's always kind of changing. And maybe, I guess, meds would help me with that. I have no idea. But it's just, yeah, it's tricky to navigate all of these things because all of these things take time to navigate too.
Well, yeah, they take time and they take money and they take resources.
Yes.
And then if you can remove all that, then it's making sure that you have the right meds and then maybe not wanting to be on meds after a certain while. So you have to have certain exercises that you can do to calm yourself down in situations, or maybe eventually the thing that used to trigger that is no longer important to you anymore. See, there's a part of me that I think we have a lot of power. Our brain has a lot of power to move us in different directions, and it's not until we feel really a lot of discomfort that we make a change. Or some
Hmm.
of us just live in the discomfort and don't make the change, and that's a decision. But
Hmm.
to realize that you're having discomfort and it's becoming to the point where it's not something that you can easily live with is when you make a change, or if something environmental around you changes, that may change too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Hmm.
like picking your cuticles in a way. There
Yeah.
are times where you don't do it at all for a long time, and all of a sudden you find yourself, why am I starting to, oh, there must be some nervous react,
Yeah.
something's triggering my nervousness that's causing me to do this, or
Yeah.
maybe it's an intense conversation, or I'm angry at somebody, or whatever it
Hmm.
is. So I think that that's true that mental health is, a journey and it's not
Hmm.
a straight journey
Right.
and it has lots of ups and downs and zigzags. But I think that if your overall self talk is that this does not diminish you as a person and that
Hmm.
you're not an outlier, because it really, when you think about it, I think the thing that has held me together for in lots of situations was there's no way I could be the only one.
Yes.
There's going to be many people thinking what I'm thinking,
Yes.
you know,
100%.
unless I'm a super outlier, and that would be a totally different thing.
Hmm.
But what comes to mind when I say that is that I've had several incidences at mechanics where I will bring a problem in, and the first thing they say to me is, "Well, we've never seen this before," and I always say, "Really? In all the hundreds of customers, I'm the lucky one." Seriously, because it's a
Yeah.
way to put me off, like
Hmm.
we really don't want to deal with you, or we can't fix this, or we're not, we're
Yeah.
just going to make you feel like you're the only one that's ever felt this way. We're going to diminish you right now. And
Yeah.
so I think to keep yourself from feeling diminished, you need to understand that there's so many people dealing with all different increments of the same, types of
Hmm.
mental health and the issues and the way that they address them for themselves and how they take care of themselves is something
Hmm.
that's important to talk about, because you can glean a lot from other people.
Yeah, you
you know
can.
yeah, I mean, that's the positive nature of some of the stuff on social media. There's a lot of
Yes.
crap on social media, but there's a lot of people saying some really important things,
Hmm.
and that can lower the anxiety rate of a lot of people, knowing that you're not in this by
So,
by yourself is something super important.
yeah.
But yeah, I think that we all trauma is on a spectrum, and some of us
Hmm.
have had more trauma than others, and different types of trauma, and we bring those into situations.
Hmm.
And I think that the more that we can talk about it, the better it is.
Yeah,
Honestly,
especially when it comes to, I think about my dad, and it's like if we had been able to talk about it back then, he could be alive, perhaps. I mean, who knows? But if there was less
right,
stigma and more openness in families and friendships and communities, then the outcome for so many people who did struggle with mental
right,
illnesses like bipolar disorder and others
right,
could have
right,
had access to things which could have prevented who knows what or given
right,
him a longer life. Who knows?
right. Absolutely.
But yeah.
You also have to, there's an element of compliance as well. You
Hmm.
have to be a
There
willing
is.
participant in your own recovery.
You do, and that's tricky, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it's part of a mental illness where it's like, yeah, if you're not taking the drugs or the medicine, like it's not going to help you, and it's tricky.
right,
You can't force
right. Or if you don't
someone.
want to, right, if you don't want to participate in certain therapeutic practices either.
I wonder how much I think that amongst men, cis men and stuff, it's like I wonder how much who you are when you're navigating mental illness really does affect the outcome too, right? Because like
Sure.
if it were you, maybe because women are tend to talk more or have that community, and I know I'm generalizing here, but I think that does make a difference in someone getting help or not, because sometimes with therapy and stuff it's less stigmatized for queer people or non-binary people or women, whereas like with men and cis men and that culture of like masculinity and not talking about our feelings and not crying and all of that, I think it perpetuates men suffering in silence too.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think that
Yeah.
hopefully over the as we become better at, opening up about things, there won't be such a, I don't know, chasm between what we offer women and what we think of women and what we think of men.
Hmm.
And we become more human. But I think you're right. And I think that it starts out, talk about mental health. I think about when your brother was in sports and the things that came out of my mouth during a sporting event over the boys playing baseball, which now I would just like be shake it off was one of them.
Mm.
If they got hit by a ball,
Hmm.
right? Shake it
Yeah.
off. I mean, the whole
Oh yeah.
crowd would say it. There
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
even your
right.
kid. They
Yeah.
would say, shake it off. I'm like, God, I look back on that going, wow, that's horrible. I said, shake it off. Like, just get on with the game. We're in a game. Don't, and I'm not that big of a sports enthusiast, but you get so wrapped up. And I wasn't the one, I didn't holler or yell or make my kid crazy, but
Hmm.
there were certain things that I would say like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
shake it off was one of the big ones.
Hmm.
Or when we were in football, which we only did one time because the coaching was so misogynistic, I couldn't handle it. I mean, he would call the boys, he would say to the boys they're going to have to play with their Barbie dolls if they can't win, and we'll paint your nails,
Oh,
if you lose
geez.
the game, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get out of this environment. This was terrible. I'm trying to raise a son who's not like that, and here
Hmm.
we are. We have a coach it was just horrible. So
Yeah.
that all that stuff, all these things that are said to you
Hmm.
contribute to your mental health, and
Yeah.
especially these negative ideas
Hmm.
that are really hard to overcome as we are developing as humans around other humans.
Yes.
And it's so incredibly sad to think about why is it so hard to live in a more benevolent environment than we do. And
Hmm.
those of us that are trying to create benevolence get ridiculed for that we're
Hmm.
just not strong enough, we're not sensitive.
Like it's somehow weak to take care of
Right,
yourself or
right,
put up boundaries or take a break or whatever it is, when
right,
really that's strength, knowing what you
right,
need to do for yourself.
right. I just remember things happening when I was a younger adult, and people would show me really off-color jokes, especially about other ethnic backgrounds, and they did it on purpose because they knew I was fundamentally against things like that, and so they
Mm,
did it to to get my goat.
mhm.
And I'm thinking, why would they even approve of that? Why is
Right.
something like that even funny to you? That you think it's funny and then you want to bring it to somebody who you know is not going to appreciate that at all, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, it's happened quite often as I've, been on this earth where people say things that are just so, you know, deplorable in a way against other people. And I feel like if that's how a lot of people feel, how do the rest of us cope,
Mhm.
right? And I think the one thing that mental health providers try so desperately to do for us, for those of us who are seeking help, is to learn coping skills
Right.
that allow us to be more forgiving in relationships, less importance being put on who's right or wrong, but how can we agree? Kind of those kinds of things. How do we cope without losing our you know what in front of people or in a situation just for ourselves to keep ourselves calm. And
Yeah.
we have all these young men, generally white young men, who are creating all this crime, and they're
Mhm.
the ones that generally are these lone shooters. Well, what do we expect? We're
Yeah.
not coming to anybody's aid. They're not allowed to talk about anything. They're holed up privately in bedrooms or basements, coming up, conjuring all this crap off what they're seeing on the internet, what they think about themselves, and it's just if I dwell too much on that, it becomes almost overwhelming.
Yes, unbearable.
Right. So
Yeah.
what I hope for is that people are learning constructive ways how to maintain their level of sanity and
Mhm.
composure and coping with things that the good things that they can find on the internet and the good therapy that's out there, and being able to talk to family. I think
Mhm.
that's another thing. I think often even in our own families we don't want to talk about what might be bothering us.
Totally. Yeah.
We don't want to. One reason is because maybe we don't want to burden our family. They have so enough
Mhm.
to do. Why do we not bring this to them? And the other
Mhm.
because we don't want to embarrass ourselves. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a whole host of reasons why we don't share in those relationships, which really are the ones that are supposed to bring us the most comfort.
I know, except if that family can't be vulnerable. Then it's hard to bring your shit to them because if they can't hold space for you, it's
Right.
hard. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
don't turn to them as much as maybe you would.
Right.
They
If you're
have.
vulnerable, that means you have to look inward. And looking
Yes.
inward is very frightening for some people.
Oh my gosh, it's totally
And
uncomfortable sometimes, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
see, I don't have that. I
Yeah.
was going to call it an affliction.
Yeah.
It's not really an affliction, but it's so, I feel bad that if there's so much pain involved in looking at the pain,
Mhm.
that seems so sad to me.
Yeah, I agree. Mhm.
Because when it comes right down to it, looking at the pain is not as painful as when it was inflicted on you.
Yeah. And see, that's why I'm so grateful that you were a parent who could have those hard conversations with me and made them age appropriate for me growing up. Because I think that's probably why I'm so well adjusted now, despite what happened, despite all my shit. Yeah. Because I had someone who I could go to and you explained things to me and you didn't shy away from having those tough conversations.
Well, I appreciate that, and I
Yeah.
think if you're going to thank me, then I have to turn around and thank my mother for that,
Right. The
because
whole lineage
yeah,
there.
yeah, because I
Hmm.
think that I was not raised by punitive parents.
Hmm.
I wasn't raised by parents who wanted me to follow in their footsteps
Hmm.
necessarily, except for my morality and my
Ethics.
character.
Yeah.
They didn't put me down
Hmm.
and talk mean to me, and I wasn't dealt with in a volatile way. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I can count on my hand twice in my growing up that I got potched,
Yeah.
which is a little spanking on my tush.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the norm. There were no wooden spoons.
Yeah.
My parents didn't make me afraid of them, and I feel like when you use any type of really what it's considered
Violence.
to me a weapon
Yeah.
or
Or
violence.
abuse. Yeah.
How does a child mitigate? That's so hard because now there's a duality between I love my parent, I trust my parent. Well, I don't trust my parent when they're angry at me, or I can't trust them when I really need them. And that's why every time on the news during this whole school board issues with these rigid school boards and wanting and teachers having to report if a kid comes with different pronouns or absolutely feels comfortable enough to come to a teacher and tell them, a coming out story, there's a reason why parents don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
parents are not pointing their fingers at themselves. They're
Mm-hmm.
pointing out.
Mm-hmm.
Point to yourself and say, why is my child more willing? I haven't heard anybody say this yet, and maybe I haven't seen everything. Why is a child more willing to go to a teacher or someone outside of the parent to divulge information like this, which is very difficult to divulge? What kind of environment have you created in your household which
Mm-hmm.
prevents your own child from having a discussion with you?
Yes.
That's what I
100%
think.
that. Mm-hmm.
Start pointing the finger back at yourself and say, what am I
Yes.
doing to create an unhealthy home life that my child does not feel they can wrap themselves around me
Mm-hmm.
and tell me anything?
Yes.
Every time that comes up, I yell at the TV set.
I know,
Why
me
aren't
too.
you the right person for this child? Why
Exactly.
can't
What is
this
it?
issue
Don't be your
outside your...
child's first bully.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
perfect way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember having a discussion with somebody about a wooden spoon, and I finally said, look, if you're going to hit your kid, to me it's cowardice to hit them with a wooden spoon. Why don't you use your hand so you can feel it too? And not that I'm condoning that, but I'm thinking, really? You're
Mm-hmm.
putting yourself sort of like a third person in
Yeah.
this volatile act.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spoon just becomes, then you don't have to use the spoon anymore. You just hold it up and it becomes such a frightening thing to a child. They just run
Absolutely.
away.
Right.
So can you imagine households who are using these strategies? Why do you think the kids run away to a teacher?
Right.
Why do they go to a friend?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they go to somebody that they find more comfortable than you?
Mm-hmm.
What does that say about you as a parent?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Well, to end this episode, I wanted to say a
I
few
feel like I
things.
just got militant. We need to
I
bring it
know.
down.
No, it's okay.
We need to bring it down to Mr. Rogers level, I think, for a moment.
Well, do you think Mr.
Oh,
Rogers was so calm because he got a little militant behind the scenes ever? I mean,
well, I think, yeah,
he was a
it's
passionate
possible.
guy, I feel like.
Well, he was, and from what I've read about him, and I've seen a couple of movies, I think there was a lot of restraint there.
Yeah.
There
Hmm.
was a lot of intentionality there, and sometimes I wonder if he was also a little distant
Hmm.
because he didn't want to perhaps react in what could have been a, a non Mr. Rogers reaction.
Sure.
So I don't
Yeah.
think intention is bad,
Yeah.
but in fact, I think it's really good. But I think that he really maintained something
Composure.
he fought hard. Yeah, I think he
Yeah.
really fought hard to keep his emotions in check at certain times,
Hmm.
and I'm sure he didn't do it all the time. But
Yeah.
what I'm grateful for with him is that we had him. We can still go back to him if we want to. We can still introduce our children to him, and that he wasn't afraid
Hmm.
in a very low key way to teach some really important lessons.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that was really important to me and to the rest of the world that got to see him. But I really think that if we look at the level of volatility in our own households or where that vibration level is,
Hmm.
if it's high, your kids aren't going to talk to you.
Yeah.
So you can just guarantee that your wife won't talk to you, your husband won't talk to you. You've got to take things down.
Hmm. I
You
was
had
gonna
a friend who used to say, "Take it down a notch."
take it down a notch.
Down a
You're
notch.
here. We need you here.
I needed
I'm
to say that.
I'm grateful that I have friends that I can talk to about mental health stuff because I do think that makes all the difference, and with family too, obviously. I was gonna say to end this episode, I was thinking about something that I just read, which is if you have OCD, you can, and you're a theater kid, you can just say whenever there's like a moment where the OCD is like making you do something that you don't want to do, like touch the cup 5 times, you can let it do that whole thing and then say end scene.
That's wonderful.
I know. I thought maybe I'll try that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
but what are
so.
some other we mentioned tools. Are there one or two tools that you like to use, Mom, to calm yourself down when you're
Yeah, so I
needing?
breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's breathing through my nose and out my mouth is one of them.
Yeah.
I give myself sort of well, I do what my dad used to say to me. He said, "I'm not always going to be around to pat you on your shoulder if you do something good or if you need me to pat you on the shoulder. So you're going to need to pat yourself on your shoulder." So I do hug myself and pat myself on the shoulder.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
That's nice.
And there was a mantra that my mother taught me, which I don't know if I can bring up right now, but if I can't, we can put it in the synopsis of the episode. We'll write that in there. It was something like, oh, I won't say it now, but I'll come up with it. And
Yeah.
then, but one thing, and not to be too funny, but my mom was always afraid of what would happen if she had a panic attack and passed out. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember having that. She gave that part of herself to me quite nicely, and I used to worry about that. And her therapist said to her, "Well, if you lie down, that can't happen." So in other words, if you can, sit down or lie down, and that
Yeah.
won't happen.
Yeah.
So it's a way of taking the fear away. There are things
Yes.
you can do to liberate yourself
Yes.
from the anxiety.
That's so
You
true.
know,
My
that's one.
therapist, I tap my shoulders sometimes. Like,
Yes,
yeah, which is helpful.
yeah. Tapping's supposed to be very good.
Yes, tapping is
Yeah.
supposed to be good.
Also, standing up and just wiggling like you see little kids do when they
Yes.
can't contain themselves.
Yeah, you
That's supposed to
gotta
be really good for your lymphatic system. And so
mm-hmm.
I think anything
Shake it
that
out.
distracts you,
Yeah.
it's kind of like when I was, yeah, it's a switch, what they teach you in childbirthing classes.
Mm-hmm.
They have you massage your arm or tickle yourself in one area because your brain
Mm-hmm.
can't do two things at once. It can't focus on the pain and the pleasure at the same time.
Yeah.
So anything to distract yourself
Yeah.
is always
Intentionally
helpful.
distract. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, and if it is early enough in the evening and you want to talk to somebody, call up somebody that you trust and have a even if it's not that, you don't even have to say I'm freaking out right now. You just say, "Hi, how are you?" And that is another distraction.
True. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, you don't always have to divulge yourself if you feel you don't want to, but you can always
Mm-hmm.
call somebody.
Yes, you can.
Well, I hope we didn't damage anybody's mental health today.
Let's
With
hope not.
fire.
We're not qualified
No.
professionals. Okay. Just know that.
We're only speaking from our own experiences.